The Honourable Jim Anderson.
Mr Speaker, there are two things Canterbury people need. They need to get on with things as quickly as possible, and they need to be involved in the decisions about the recovery of their city. For some reason, there is a view that public participation is in conflict with rapid decision-making. In fact, it's my view that they are both essential to each other. You cannot rebuild quickly if you don't take all of the people in the community along with you, because people who are left out will challenge the process, they will feel disillusioned, and ultimately the process will fail. And there is no point consulting if you don't get the processes and decisions moving, because people will simply leave if there is inaction, or they will stay away, and some of them won't come back, or they will try to push on their own, when what we need is to coordinate all of the efforts to rebuild Christchurch on a community-wide and collective basis. So I support this Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority bill because it enables the immense amount of work that Christchurch faces to be done, and it offers the opportunity for genuine consultation. I say opportunity, Mr Speaker, because basically it's not what you write on a piece of paper or even a piece of legislation, it's how you implement it and what you do about the proposals for consultation, because consultation in writing is not the same as taking the opportunity for consultation. So I want to warn that it is critical that the CERA authority consults and that the process is open to everyone in Canterbury who wants to participate. It's transparent and it's accountable. And that's why I'll be supporting amendments to the bill at the committee stage. Those amendments, which I've looked at carefully from colleagues on this side of the House, seem to me to add some substance to particularly the community relationships and community consultation that I believe is essential. I recently read an article by Stephen Ames, who has been in New Zealand looking at issues like the recovery of Christchurch in other arenas, and I summarise what he said was the challenge for Christchurch. Quote, "We have to shift our perspective from recovering what we once were to building what we seek to become." End quote. He outlines the phases on the road back from disaster, and they'll be clearly apparent to anyone who lives in Christchurch. Firstly, there's the rescue phase, when the hours after emergency require people to be saved or those who are killed or injured to be removed. The second phase is recovery, as we reconnect the essential services of water, power, sewerage and roading and so on. And then the stage that we are approaching now, but not really there yet, which you could call the rebuilding stage. But a comparison of cities that have rebuilt brilliantly and cities that have struggled shows that there's probably a need for a fourth stage. Ames describes it as, quote, revisioning, end quote. The ultimate success of rebuilding depends on how much the city is able to understand how its context has changed. In other words, there has been a cataclysmic event, and how are we now approaching that, and what understanding do we have of the implications of that event on us all? How much people understand where they may be headed and what the emerging trends and issues are and lie ahead is going to be critically important to what they and the city aspires to be. I want to read into the record the conclusion that Ames comes to. Quote, "City leaders would be remiss only to think of what must be rebuilt or replaced to bring the city back to where it was on the eve of the quake. Human nature suggests that when disaster strikes, we hunker down," and we surely did some of that, "convinced we cannot afford the luxury of thinking beyond our most urgent needs. And then he goes on to conclude, but this moment also represents a singular opportunity for Christchurch and all of Canterbury to rethink, revision and reinvent itself, end quote. So, Mr. Speaker, the ability for Christchurch and Canterbury people to reimagine Christchurch requires leadership. Leadership capable of engaging with all of the city's people. The success of what we have to do will therefore depend much more on that leadership than it does on any structure we have. I've been in business and in politics and in other walks of life long enough to know that you can have the most brilliant organisational structure imaginable, but if you don't have the right people running it, it's a waste of time, and vice versa. The success of what we do, therefore, as I say, will depend on the quality of leadership that we put in place. So I'm not as concerned with the structure of CERA as I am with having the right people to run it. We need people leading the rebuild who understand the stages of recovery that I've outlined to the House this afternoon. We need people with experience in managing large enterprises with understanding of Christchurch, its ethos and its culture, and with a vision for its future. We need leaders who have the confidence of the people and are able to communicate with them and get things done. If there's one thing that I know about failure in Christchurch in the recent 6 or 7 months, it's not so much the talking about the problems that are straight in front of us, but it's actually information and communication about what is next and what can be done, and involving people in those decisions and the strategic plan that's there and so on. And very few people in Christchurch have any grasp of that, and that seems to me to be a lack of proper communication. The ability to engage the community and get things moving was a big disappointment after the first quake. I have to say that, and I think the government's response reflects that to some extent. It didn't happen well enough, and not enough was done soon enough. Contrast that with what's happened, for example, in Kaiapoi. And people say, well, Kaiapoi is a lot smaller than Christchurch, so it's easier there. Well, there's an element of truth in that, but actually, Kaiapoi did some things that Christchurch did not do. They got cracking early, they talked to their people, community meetings were held, they were re-held, ideas were accepted, they were tested, they were put back to the community, and finally the community had a strategic plan drawn up which they recognised, studied, discussed and then signed off. Now, not all of them agreed, of course, but they did agree that they had been consulted properly and that they knew what was happening. And guess what? What's happening in Kaiapoi is happening very quickly, and I have to say that Christchurch is nowhere near the position that Kaiapoi is in. Dealing with the problems is not easy, that's true, but it hasn't been as fast as it needs to be, and it hasn't adequately involved people, and that needs to change. So I understand why the government has taken control, and I don't blame them. It's a recognition that a lot of taxpayer money is at stake, and also that things need to be handled better than they were after the first quake. What we need to see now is, in this legislation, is a commitment to listening and making the community part of the rebuild. People need to feel their views are taken into account and that the kind of Christchurch they want is actually being created. Because otherwise, if they feel it's not the Christchurch they were born into, came to or want to experience again, they will feel no commitment to it and it will fail. I recognise the government has not abused its sweeping and extraordinary powers under the first Christchurch emergency legislation. I must say I'm pleased to be able to say that to the House. This gives me hope that it will continue to use its powers in good faith in the future. But it has to do more than that. It has to reach out to a shocked and fragile community, and I don't know that many New Zealanders fully appreciate the fragility and the shock that is being felt in the Christchurch community. And the government and the authority we're setting up here today has to engage with the people of Christchurch on these issues. So that is how we're going to move forward from recovery, Mr. Speaker, to rebuilding a new vision for Christchurch, and in the true Canterbury spirit, I know that we actually have the resilience and the strength to do exactly that.
Members, this debate is concluded. The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Ayes have it. Party votes called for. I'll ask the clerk for a party vote.
New Zealand National.
58 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour. 42 votes in favour. Green Party.
9 votes opposed.
Act New Zealand.
5 votes in favour.
Māori Party.
4 votes in favour.
Progressive.
1 vote in favour.
United Future.
1 vote in favour.
Honourable Chris Carter.
Vote opposed.
Hone Harawira.
1 vote opposed.
Members, the ayes are 111, the noes are 11. The motion is agreed to.
Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Bill. First reading.
This bill is set down for second reading